And all right. So, well, good afternoon, everybody. Welcome to Philadelphia, if you're joining us from afar. I'm Don Miller. I'm faculty in the Craft and Materials Study program at UArts here at University of the Arts. And we're very pleased to be partnering with the Center of Art and Wood to present this lecture by Seattle-based artist Humaira Abid, whose exhibit, Searching for Home, is currently at the center. We were planning on hosting Humaira here on today in Philadelphia for a lecture, but that didn't work out. But we're very grateful that she's here today online, helping us stay engaged with our students and with our community during this very difficult time. I'd like to introduce Nava, Jennifer Navika-Milliken, the director of the Center for Art and Wood. But first, I'd like to remind you to keep your video and audio muted until the Q&A. You can unmute your video during the Q&A at the end of the lecture. And if you are in speaker view, the lecture screen should stay open. So afterwards, Nava will moderate a Q&A. So welcome everyone, enjoy, and I will hand it over to Nava.
Thanks so much, Don. Hi everyone, I am Jennifer Nava-Milliken. I'm artistic director, the Center for Art and Wood, and the curator of the exhibition Humaira Abid, Searching for Home. I'm so thrilled to introduce you to Humaira, our artist speaker. Humaira, for those of you who don't already know who she is, she's renowned for her unique visual language, which blends sculpture and carving in wood with a twist on traditional Mughal miniature painting. Her occupation with wood carving, which is traditionally and continues to be a male-dominated field, reflects her commitment to challenging stereotypes. The beauty and mastery of her carvings of prosaic everyday objects, which contain their own deep subtext, belie the violence, cruelty, upheaval, and instability in society, especially the violence to which women are particularly subject. Humaira, who is based in Seattle, received her BFA in sculpture from the National College of the Arts in Lahore, Pakistan, in 2000. Her work has been exhibited in museums and galleries and documented in publications around the world. Humaira is the recipient of numerous awards and honors, and most recently the prestigious Artist Trust Arts Innovator Award. So the exhibition Searching for Home opened at Bellevue Arts Museum in Seattle in late 2017. Its focus on the worldwide refugee crisis was the result of Humaira's extensive research with women in refugee camps in Pakistan and refugee women who had been resettled throughout the greater Seattle area. The exhibition opened at the Center for Art and Wood in February 2020. Its run, which was originally meant to have closed this weekend, has been extended to the end of July. And I hope, as I mentioned just a few minutes ago, I hope that this means that those of you who are based in Philly are able to visit Philly once the restrictions are lifted and it's safe to do so. And those of you who have not yet seen the exhibition will be able to do so. In the meantime, you're all invited to head over to the center's new site for online programs and activities. We are calling this the Woodshed, where you'll find a self-guided tour of the exhibition at the center. And I've listed the link in the chat section. If you're having trouble following that link afterwards, just let me know and I'll send it to you directly. I do have, before I hand this over to Humaira, I have a few people that I need to thank, without whom the center would not have been able to host this exhibition and bring it from Seattle. Principally, Goldblum and Pollan's immigration attorneys at law, who were enthusiastic supporters of the exhibition. Also Helen Williams Drutt English, the center's Cambion Giving Society, the Bressler Family Foundation, the Pennsylvania Council on the Arts, the Philadelphia Cultural Fund, the William Penn Foundation, and the Wingate Foundation. We also acknowledge Artist Trust and For Culture for their support of the organization of the exhibition in Seattle. And I also want to say, I want to add thanks to the University of the Arts for persevering and remaining so committed to this program. As Don mentioned, it was originally meant to take place physically, with Humaira actually here in Philadelphia with us and on the university campus. I am so thrilled that we could connect with an even wider audience today and involve those of you who would not otherwise have been able to attend the talk in person. So thank you so much for joining us. And I wanted to add one thing about the Q&A portion at the end of Humaira's talk. Once she's concluded her lecture, we will open the discussion to questions from all of you. While you're invited to turn on your video at this time, I ask that you keep the audio turned off and muted so that we can facilitate this in a way and Humaira is able to actually, clearly understand the question and answer it. So you are invited to submit your question in the chat section and then I'll moderate it from there. We'll keep this going until you run out of questions or until about 6:30, whatever happens. One last note to mention before I hand this over to Myra, and thank you so much for your patience. Toward the end of the first installation of the exhibition in Seattle in mid-2018, I was attending a discussion in Brooklyn at Brick Arts featuring young artists from Haiti. And one of them said something that continues to sit with me today. She said, "I began to make art because I wanted to be free." And this simple sentence really stuck with me because it is such an essential and pure distillation of the reason for art and the reason that we need to continue to support it. In times of disruption, displacement, and confusion, as we most poignantly understand right here and right now in this moment, art serves as our beacon for all that is right with humanity. So I hope you'll continue to applaud and support our artists who are now more important to the health of our society than ever before. So now, if anyone embodies that clear sense of purpose and driving mission of making art as an assertion of freedom, it's Humaira. So it is my distinct pleasure to welcome to this Zoom event one of the most courageous artists I've ever known and my very good friend, Humaira Abid.
Thank you so much. Thank you for having me. Thank you for doing that. And also adopting the new, online way of doing it. So I'm glad we could do that. I'm going to turn on my slideshow. Okay, can you all see it? Yeah, okay. So I want to give you some background how I became an artist. I was born in Pakistan, grew up in a family which was comparatively open-minded, but still there were a lot of limitations and boundaries. Growing up, I was good in studies. So especially in Asia, when kids are good in studies, their parents want them to be doctors or engineers. My family really wanted me to be a doctor. Like I had a huge pressure. I took actually pre-medical in my high school, and I tried for 2 years, but it was not something that spoke to me. So I had a conversation with my father, and I said, "This is not something I'm enjoying. I can't even see blood. I actually pass out if I see blood." So I said, "I don't think I can do that," and I have tried for 2 years. So my father said, "Okay, what do you want to do?" I said, I feel I enjoy drawing and sketching. I would like to give it a try. And he felt really surprised. But he didn't stop me. My father was very open-minded. So he said, you can go ahead. Sorry, can you hear me? I hear some.
If I could just remind everybody to mute themselves. And if people don't know where to do that, that's at the lower left corner of your screen. You have a little button with a microphone. And if you just click on that, you will mute your screen. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Sorry about that. Yeah. So my father said, okay, you can give it a try. And I went to one of the very established and known artists, and I joined his studio and I took some classes, and there was no going back for me. I fell in love immediately. I felt this was my calling, and I decided to go to art school. And that was the time when actually it became real to my family, because they were thinking probably she will try and, not pursue it. And I remember my whole family was sitting on one side of the table and I on the other side, and we were having this conversation. Art schools were considered places where students or kids get a lot of freedom. They don't follow any rules. So they felt that it will not be good, especially for women. So I'm the youngest in my family, so both my brothers were like additional parents for me, and they were really against me going to art school. But that was the first time I made a decision on my own, and I said, no matter what, I'm going to art school. uh, so I did. I applied, I got admission in one of the very prestigious art school, and I joined. um, we grew up in Pakistan, where there is a lot of energy spent on hiding stories. I really felt, I really feel that we are all made up of stories, stories we tell others, stories we tell ourselves, and most importantly, the stories we hide. And in Pakistan, we spend a lot of time hiding stories. We grew up in a society where talking about a lot of issues was actually taboo. For example, even sex, puberty, relationships, fertility, and all these issues. There is a long list, and I always questioned it. I give a lot of credit to my father. A lot of people ask me, how am I so strong? How can I talk about all these issues? If there was a woman who was a role model for me growing up, and honestly, there wasn't any. Um, the strongest person I know around me was actually my father. And in our household, brothers and the sisters and brothers, girls and boys were treated equally. So I had all the opportunities that my brother had too. So when I went to art school, uh, it was, although against the wishes of my family, but this was something that I really wanted to do. And I knew that I will be a storyteller. I will be talking about women issues, things that bothered me growing up. I will be talking about them. Um, so I started working around those issues. Sorry. And I started working around those issues when I was in first year. And when I was in second year, we have to decide what major we are going to take in third year and fourth year. And I remember my seniors, teachers, a lot of people were warning me not to take sculpture as your major. I was doing really well. I got scholarship all 4 years. So all of my teachers thought I'll take their major as my major: painting, sculpture, miniature painting, and printmaking. Sculpture was one thing that everybody was warning me against it. Uh, Sorry, there is still sound. Can you please mute if you haven't done so? Thank you.
Humaira, I took care of it. Keep going.
Okay, sorry. Yeah. So I thought everybody is giving me so many warnings. I just have to see what's so tough about it, and I took sculpture as my major. And when I was in sculpture department, I uh, actually did not see any woman. Not really. We had very few sculptors, and not really many women working in three-dimensional mediums, and no one working in wood. And when I was in my major, and when I started traveling also, I did not see. Wood was one medium which I felt was primarily male-dominated medium. South Asia is known for wood carvings, mainly for furniture making and construction. And miniature painting was another medium that I was very inspired by or attracted to pursue. It was started as book illustration, but later on became an art form. Uh, Sorry. Yeah, and later on become an art form itself. So I felt I could do something interesting with these two mediums. Uh, my parents were born in India, so for this lecture, I'm going to focus on my series Searching for Home. which is now up at Center for Art in Wood. My parents were born in India. They were very young. My mother was, I think, about 4, and my father was about 7. In 1947, when at the time of partition, they moved from India to Pakistan. So we grew up hearing stories of migration. Although they were very young, but they heard stories from their parents, and they were passed on to us. And when I was growing up, I saw a lot of Afghan refugees around us. Until 2013, Pakistan was on top of the list for taking maximum number of refugees. So I saw a lot of them struggling, trying to make their home again. And about 12 years ago, I moved to US, although that was out of choice, but still I could relate to few things. Every time I went to Pakistan, people here would ask me, "Oh, you are going back home." So for them, my home was probably where I was born, and it started a conversation in my mind: is home a place where you are born, or is it a place where you feel you belong? So I decided to do a whole series around that theme. The first image that came to my mind when I started thinking about searching for home was actually a barbed wire fence. When I was growing up as a kid, we were surrounded by barbed wire fence because we lived outside an army-owned area, and there were a lot of fences around us. So I said, okay, is there something? And because I was working in wood, so for me, this medium was a challenge, and I wanted to push the boundaries. So I said, is it possible that I can do barbed wire in wood? And I have an assistant that I've been working for years. I trained him. He's a furniture maker though. So I remember I had a discussion with him that I want to try making barbed wire fence. And for 6 months, he didn't even pay attention to what I was saying. He was like, she's probably crazy that she thinks she can make barbed wire out of wood. But I was very persuasive. I kept asking him because I need his help. I'm going to do a lot of experimentation. So eventually he said, okay, yeah, we can give it a try. So for next 1 year, it was a lot of trial. I did a lot of studies. I look at the details, and I do a lot of sketching. I think about how am I going to do it. And then after a year and a half, I was able to resolve the basic technique. How am I going to do it? So if you see the close-up, each knot is made out of 2 pieces. Uh, you can see here, they're separately, and then they're joined to make this knot. And each section is about 5 inches and also made out of 2 pieces of wood. So here the pieces are cut straight, and then they are steamed and pressed in a mold to get this curved shape. And then the knot 2 pieces are carved separately and then glued together. So after about a year and a half, this is all I had, 2 feet of barbed wire fence. But at that time, I had resolved the issues, how am I going to do it? And then it was mainly the matter of labor. So took another year, started with about 400 feet, planned for 400 feet, broke about 80 feet, and ended up close to about 320, which was just enough to make a 30 feet long barbed wire fence for the installation. Here you can see I'm assembling all 5-inch pieces. This is 5 days before the show opening at the time of installation at Bellevue Arts Museum, when the first time the pieces were joined. And this is how it was installed. So the posts are existing cedar wood, and then the barbed wire was assembled, and this is 30 feet long barbed wire fence. And this is to show you just the scale of barbed wire fence. This is how it was installed. So when there was a discussion going on about my show with the curator and with the museum, one of my intention was to have barbed wire fence as the audience would enter into the show, and they are limited by the 30 feet, they're faced by the 30 feet long barbed wire fence. So they cannot actually enter into the space, but they have to go all around it to enter into the space. So there are 2 feelings that I was aiming to achieve. One, when they are on this side of the fence, they feel they are outside the fence. And once they go all around it and inside, they will feel they are inside the space or inside the barbed wire fence. I also wanted to show you an image how it is installed now at Center for Art in Wood. And again, with the same concept that when the viewers enter into the space, they are faced by this long barbed wire fence and they have to go around it to enter into the space. At one point, for me as a sculptor, as an artist, it is important that I'm not just pushing the boundaries of medium, but I'm also making people think. Uh, I call myself conceptual artist. For me, successful work of art is when execution and concept are in balance. So for me, just making a barbed wire fence, surprising people that I could do something like that was not enough. And I wanted to make people think. So at one point, there is a carved pine wood underwear hung, which also to point out one of the biggest crimes of war, which is rape and molestation. And also, I'm interested in women's stories. So although this show is about searching for home from a point of view of immigrants and refugees, but my focus is women and girls, because I feel it's often women and girls who don't end up sharing their stories or their experiences. During my research, I felt all the stories I was hearing from the male member of the house. So it was clearly a male point of view. They were talking about the issues from their point of view. I had questions like, okay, what were they doing if they were going through menstrual cycle, if they are pregnant, if they have an infant? What did they do to get by that time? They have such a limitation how much they can take with them. And I was interested in these questions and I couldn't find answers. So I decided to do my own research and I started asking these questions. I remember there is a refugee center in Pakistan on the northern areas where it is only for women, refugee women. And some of the women ran from Afghanistan and came all the way to Pakistan to take refuge. And some of the women said they didn't have anything. They didn't even have time to wear their shoes. So what did they do to get by that time if they had menstrual cycle? And their supervisor said, we have received some women completely covered in blood. They did not have anything. So these are the topics that I'm interested in. I'm interested in the stories that no one is asking, especially to women and girls. So this was to bring up these issues, talking about rape, molestation. If someone is interested to learn more about it, I will recommend a book, A Camel for a Son. It's stories of women in camps in Kenya. And they have shared their own stories, what has happened to them when they were running at the border, and then again when they were in the camps. So yeah, so this is just to start a conversation and talk about these issues. I wanted to show you this image so you can see close up. A lot of people who came to the show saw it up close and they couldn't figure it out if it was wood, uh, which was something that I'm really proud of. A lot of people thought they felt it's rusted barbed wire, actual barbed wire. And I was also happy that it was creating a lot of shadows, which was playing in the space. So once you are inside the fence, on the other side, what you see is actually this another installation, portraits of young girls between the ages of 4 and 11 in different refugee camps, Syria, Pakistan, Jordan, Afghanistan, Kenya. And I wanted to paint their portraits. If you see, there are bullet holes. This was my reference photographs. Often when I see images of people after war, when they are attacked, displacement, these are often the images that you see. A lot of bullet holes, damaged buildings, some leftover items in the houses. So this was my reference photo for this installation. And I wanted to paint portraits of young girls in refugee camps. This is how it is installed, and there are also ants crawling around it. I will tell you a little bit more about ants in a little bit. So this is the first portrait, Vajan, who is 11 from Syria. So when I saw her photograph, it's stuck with me. I kept thinking about it for many days. She had a broken shoulder, but all the questions she was asked, she never mentioned about what she is going through. And often this was the case with all the girls. And when I looked at her photograph, I felt that she still has a lot of strength. And this reminded me of dandelion plant, which is also fragile, but also very strong. And this is what I got from their photographs, that no matter what has happened to them, they are going to be very strong, and they are going to get by this time, this difficult time. This is another portrait in the installation. Sana, who is in a camp when this photo was taken in Pakistan, originally from Afghanistan, and she's holding her doll. So if you see in the background of the painting, the background is, you can see tiny dots. So this is how miniature painting is developed, dot by dot. This is another painting which is inspired by a photograph of two siblings in a camp in Kenya, originally from Somalia. And that's how it is installed in the installation. This is another one. And what stood out for me about Mona, who is originally from Syria, that she had bruises on her face. But when she was asked different questions, she kept talking about home, that she's missing her home and she wants to go back to her home, but her father wants to get them a better life and wants to move to US. So there was no mention about how she got bruises on her face. So these were the things that stuck to me, that stood out to me, that they are mainly concerned about home or making home again, about their family, their parents, and they are not really concerned what they are going through. So to me, this was like their strength, that no matter what, they are going to get by that time. So I thought I will show you how miniature painting is done, just a little overview. So I usually start when I have a reference, which is mostly a photograph. I start with a sketch, and then the background. I usually use pigments and gouache. I've started making my own gouache, so I use a lot of pigments now. And then little by little, layer by layer, the details are developed, and that's how it's finished. So Laiba is Pakistan, and this photo was taken actually in a camp in Pakistan. So that's how these two portraits are installed, and you can see all the details, the installation and the ants. So talking about ants, a few years back, I had gone through multiple miscarriages, and I was put on blood thinners during my 4th pregnancy. I have a daughter now who is 8 years old. And at that time, I couldn't carve for about a year, a little over a year. But I'm an artist, I couldn't just sit and do nothing. And I said, okay, what can I do at that time? And that gave me an opportunity to explore other mediums. And I have been thinking about miniature scale sculptures. And I took a workshop with a very famous jewelry maker who used gold wires to make jewelry. And I learned how to work with wires, and I kept thinking, is there a way that I can make tiny ants? Earlier, I was thinking to paint them or do 2-dimensional medium, but then I said, okay, I need to try push the boundaries of my mediums and challenge myself and do something different. So I talked to a lot of it took me about a year, and I want to share this story just to give you an idea. Sometimes challenging ideas can be good too, and they can give you different directions, and you can try to explore different mediums. So I thought, okay, how can I do that? And I said, earlier I was thinking I will try to cast them, and I got some training in India about lost wax method, and they do small scale castings too, but I've never seen that tiny scale. So I talked to some of them, jewelers. I was told regular foundries will not be able to do it. I'll have to talk to jewelers who cast a small scale pieces in metal. So I talked to them, and they said, yeah, it's possible to do it, but then it will not look like a real ant. It will more be like a simplified form of an ant. So I kept thinking, and I talked to a friend who is in India and talking about that I've spent so many months talking to different people, and I've not been able to find a way that I can do it. And she said she knows a fabricator who has some time and needs money. If you are able to pay him for the time to spend time on experimentation, he can work with you, and he's good with small scale pieces. I said, okay, sure. So actually I've never met that fabricator. Back and forth from US to India, I would make something and send it to him, and he would work on it and send it back to me. So we spent about a year figuring out how to be able to do it. So actually, if you see the tiny part here in the middle is a bead. The rest is epoxy putty, and the armature and legs are made out of wire. So why ants? I grew up seeing ants around us. Anytime you left something, you would see ants. So to me, they represent a process of death and decaying. But for this series, they are known for migrating in groups. So which was relevant to the concept of home and migration. And also they are known for their hardworking nature, which I kind of relate with myself, being a hardworking person. But most of all, my main intention was to make people think. So if there is an installation, or let's say there are objects, because I work with a lot of recognizable objects, for a lot of people, it will be like, yeah, interesting, it's carved in wood. But when there is a presence of ants, it makes people think, and they say, why there are ants? And it will start a conversation in their own mind. Sometimes they come and say, why there are ants? And it starts a conversation. So this is another piece, again, talking about challenges of women. Uh, Breast pump. So when I had my daughter, she was 3 weeks old, my father passed away, and I was in US and I had C-section. So I left my daughter here and I went to Pakistan, and I only carried my breast pump. And I have to take multiple flights. So at every checkpoint, I was stopped and I was questioned. So I had to go through additional security checks, that why I don't have a baby and I'm carrying a breast pump. So it made my experience that much more difficult. So when I was working on this series, this was one of the questions that I asked a lot of women. And often they said they did not have an opportunity to carry something like that. They had such limitation. And often it's the male member of the house who decides what they can carry with them. So I decided to carve that in wood and include in the exhibition to also talk about these issues. And again, this is surrounded by ants. And this is how it was installed in the space at Bellevue Arts Museum. This is another installation. So once you pass the installation, the wall installation with portraits and gouache paintings, miniature paintings, the next big installation is this one. The world is not perfect. And often I see this is the landscape when people leave their home, even if it is attacked by other people, if it's war and shows displacement, this is the landscape that you often see: broken houses, piles of bricks, and leftover items. So this was my reference photograph. This is from Pakistan after one of the mosques were attacked by Taliban. So this is usually the landscape that you see after some places being attacked, mostly leftover shoes and items. So I used that to create this installation. A lot of small objects were also carved, some toys, because I also am interested to talk about kids and their situation and when something like that happens. And mobile phones and shoes, which are often the items left behind. And you can see all the detail. So these were all the shoes in the show, and you can actually see the actual ones and the ones carved in mostly pine wood, but there is one pair which is also carved in mahogany. Some of these shoes actually belong to people I know, some my family members, and some I collected. When I'm planning a show or an installation, I spend a lot of time on research, what kind of things and objects I need as my reference. This is an important stage for me. So for this installation, I didn't want new shoes. I often go to secondhand shops and buy my material because it is important for me that they have a presence of a person who have used them, and they are representing the presence of human. Uh, so I collect often used items, and this is very important stage for me because a lot of people don't realize that sometimes when you have a reference object, it takes that is one of the most important stages, that what kind of object, what size, what shape. And sometimes I also have to decide what kind of wood I'm going to use for particular images, forms. Some of these shoes actually, this one in the middle, the gray one, is actually my mother's shoes. And one of these northern area, which is we call Peshawari chappal, I kept looking for this shoe, and all I got, everybody was offering me a new shoe. And I wanted a very used one. So I sometimes have interesting stories how I collected different shoes. And So one day I was in Pakistan and it was raining, and with my niece and another friend, we were walking in a street where there were puddles of mud and water. And I suddenly saw these shoes, and I've been looking for these shoes for months. And there was one leftover shoes which was really rotten and in a bad condition, and I looked here and there and I picked it up and put it in a bag. So my family still laughs at me about this experience. So some of these experiences stick with me for a long time, how I collected different shapes. And this is one of the detailed images to show you. So there was one point after a few years, I became known for making wood, which is which has a very solid and stiff look, into a liquid, more soft-like form. And I said, what can I do different? Because I like to take challenges. So I said, okay, what can I do different? So maybe I push it on the other side and make it look even more harder, like a stone or like a brick. So these are actually mahogany wood blocks, and once carved in the shape of a brick, then they are further sandblasted to get this feel of a brick-like form. And a lot of people ask me what this A and D means, which is a logo. Often you see a logo on bricks, which usually represent the brand or the company who is making them. So I said, okay, because I'm making them, I can come up with my own logo. So A is actually the initial of my husband and my father's name, two people who are important in my life. And D is the initial of my daughter, Dua, who is now 8. This is another installation in the series. In 2014, a school in Pakistan was attacked by Taliban. It was an army school. And at that time, there was kind of like a war going on between Pakistan Army and Taliban. So Pakistan Army was attacking a lot of areas which was owned by Taliban, and they were doing different, planning different events. And during that time, some of the areas that army attacked, some of the kids of Taliban got killed. So this was a kind of a revenge by Taliban on Pakistan army. So they actually attacked a Pakistan army school, and they killed over 140 kids, and mostly boys, to actually take a revenge on Pakistan army that you killed our kids and I will kill your kids. It is one of the events. I saw photographs which affected me really deeply. I remember I couldn't sleep for a few days. I kept imagining the photographs that I saw of young kids in pools of blood, young dead bodies. And it affected me so deeply that I had to do something. I had to create some work around it, I felt. And this is the work that I created. Um, so once I saw photographs of young kids in pools of blood, just after a day, I started looking at images of Pakistan army washing the floors. So they announced they are not going to be scared of them. They are going to reopen the school which was covered completely with blood, pools of blood. And they said they are going to reopen. So they started washing the floors. And I started looking at images of people washing the floors of that school. And those images actually were even louder to me. They had these big floor mops and they were cleaning the blood from the floors. And I felt no matter what they do, they can never wash these stains from the history, no matter how much they wash. So the title of this work is The Stains Are Forever. Pacifiers to me represent not just kids and babies, but also innocence. So for me, those kids, such young kids, were innocent people, kids, souls. And white butterflies represent 9 butterflies, actually represent, to me, number is very important. So 9 from 9 months of pregnancy, because I'm mostly talking about a mother's point of view. And there are actually 39 pacifiers in this installation, again, representing 39 weeks of pregnancy. So I actually carved the mob, floor mob out of pine wood, painted butterflies in gouache, and then pacifiers are again carved in pine wood and then stained, and then they're surrounded by ants. So I thought I'll show you usually what's my process. Once I carve pacifiers in wood, I start staining. So after a few years, I have developed a technique where I can kind of control wood stains, and I use them more like paints. And then this is how I'm painting butterflies. And you can see we take such tiny paint while doing a painting to control intensity. And this was what I was hoping for, that I will achieve through this installation, that stains pacifiers, and then the butterflies are like flying away from them, like pure souls flying away from bodies. So in the same incident, all the kids who were killed were boys, because birth of a boy is celebrated in some societies, including in Pakistan, more than girls. So killing a boy means they are hurting the family even more. So there was only one girl killed, which was probably not intentional, but she got killed, only one girl. And this was her first day in school, Kola Bibi. And at such a young age, the only image I saw of her was just of her shoe. This was the image, and it just stuck to me. At that time, my daughter was the same age, similar age to that girl. So instead of making exact same shoe, my daughter had similar red shoes. So I thought to make that, because I kept thinking, what if it was my daughter? And it could have been my daughter easily. Even here in US, a lot of schools are attacked and kids are killed. So it can happen anywhere. And I kept thinking, as a mother, no matter how safe world we want to give to our kids, how much safety we can give to them. This world is beautiful no matter what, but it is dangerous too. So this installation is actually called The World is Beautiful and Dangerous Too. So the shoes were carved, and then I used the reference to paint them with wood stain. And this is how they are finished. I actually photographed my daughter. So instead of painting Kola Bibi, who was killed, I decided to actually paint my own daughter. So I photographed her. And this is how I usually make my compositions. I have a photograph. So I started sketching a cactus garden around it and started painting on handmade paper, which we call wasli. And then you can see that once I have basic layers, I start adding details. And this is my palette. So often shells are used as palettes because uh, as a natural thing, they don't have any chemical or reaction to the natural pigments that I'm using. And also I can reuse them, so it works out really well. And here, this image can show you little by little how am I adding details. And this is how it was finished. And I actually carved a swing in pine wood, and then placed the painting on top, and then the shoes were placed underneath. So this is the installation. The world is beautiful and dangerous too. So for me, it is important that I'm also sharing my point of view, what I'm feeling. Often people ask me why I use personal images in my work, and sometimes painting my daughter or myself, even though I may not have gone through the same thing. But for me, I just can't avoid thinking, what if it was me, my daughter, we were going through this, and what would I feel? So I try to step into their shoes. And sometimes I spend so much time on works that I start dreaming about them. I've had dreams when I actually saw myself instead of those people who had suffered. And it affects me really deeply. Miniature painting takes a very, very long time. Sometimes I spend weeks to months, and also my process of wood carving too. So spending that much time kind of creates a special connection for me with these topics and also these installations. This is another installation in this series, Searching for Home, which is also the title of the show. And I carved different luggage pieces just to represent immigration, moving from one place to another, and journey. So initially I was thinking to make bags, but they are closed because I don't know what they are carrying with them when people are moving from one place to another. But after conducting my research and talking to a lot of refugees, I felt it's no secret. What they take with them is actually has such limitation. So later on, I decided to add another bag, which is open. I'll show you an image later on. So here I carved out of pine wood these luggage pieces, and the smaller one, which represents young kids, a backpack has red stain, and another bag too, and shoes and pacifier stain. because I'm also talking about difficulties of young kids when they are moving. They are at an age where uh, they can't share what they're going through. They can't express, but we cannot ignore their difficulties of this journey. This is the detail. This is actually, the red color is wood stain. So when I was talking to different people, different refugees who have migrated, and one of the questions that I asked to almost everyone was, what did you bring with you when you moved from one place to another? And other than what almost everyone said, just few, items of regular use, clothes, everyday objects that they really need, because often they have a limitation what they can take with them. Almost everyone said they brought with them one thing that reminded them of either something passed on to them through family or something that reminded them of their culture. In a lot of photographs that I saw, people who moved from Afghanistan to Pakistan brought like a small rug with them. Afghanistan is known for their handmade rugs. So I decided to make that and include in the installation. So this is the open suitcase. After all the interviews I conducted, and when everybody just said few clothes, a couple of photographs, and then few daily use items, I said, this is no secret what they can bring with them. So I decided to open one suitcase and show people, audience, what they usually bring with them. And for this piece, I met a girl in Seattle who is originally from Zambia, and she moved to US for her kids under domestic violence case. This is her daughter Lela, who is 5 at the time I painted her, and my daughter was 5 at the same time. So I connected with her on this level. So while talking to her, she told me that she was very young when she got married. It was a US diplomat, originally from Africa, Zambia. And he made promises to her family that he will let her continue her education. She was very interested to get higher education. She was in 9th grade, I believe, at that time when she got married, and she hadn't reached her puberty. So her family was made promises that she will continue her education. Her husband will wait, provide her with everything she needs. So she got married at a very, very young age. Once she got married, she went through a lot of domestic violence. She conceived and got pregnant right away. um, she had 3 kids, 2 boys and 1 girl. But because she had some education and she was a strong girl, she would not just stay quiet. So the person realized that she's not going to stay like this. So he left her behind, took her passport, took the kids, youngest being as young as just few months old, and brought them with him to US, where he was posted as a diplomat. So she actually got her passport renewed, came to US, met the first wife. So when I met her, she was in Seattle, and she took her kids, moved from shelter to shelter for about 2.5 years until she met an organization, Riva, and they helped her get transitional housing. She helped her go to the court, took custody of the kids, and then later on she actually graduated from high school, went to nursing school, and she actually just graduated from a nursing school and became a nurse. So this is one of the positive stories during, and I wanted to show a positive side of it, why these programs are important, why we should support people who are actually in trouble and trying to make their home again. So I actually photographed her kids, had the opportunity to spend some time with them, and decided to paint Lela. But because she not just came for her daughter, but also for son, so I wanted to pay respect to her story and have the boy's presence in the photograph, in the painting too. So this is how it is placed in the installation. So I wanted to show you how what's my process like. Often when I have an idea, I do a lot of sketching, research, and then the important time for me is to look for that specific shape and form and size that I can carve. So this is how I stage in my studio. I go to secondhand shops a lot. I buy these items. I bring them back to my studio, I stage them, and then I start working on them and actually carve them. So this is a good example how I translate my ideas. This is another piece, which is a new addition in the same series. I also feel when I was looking at a lot of photographs of immigrants and refugees, a lot of them are carrying a plastic bag tied up or a bag tied up. Sometimes this is the only thing they are carrying with them. And it made me think that sometimes people are just moving from one place to another with such a limitation of just maybe small bag, and decided to carve that too to represent their story as well. This is another installation, one of the new installation. When I started working on this series, 2015, 2014 up to like 2017 when it was first installed, uh, I was hoping that things will improve. But since then, the issue has become even more relevant, even have expanded to other countries like Burma and India and China. So I said, I need to talk about the current issue as well in my series, because the show was going to start touring. So I wanted to make it relevant and talk about the issues which are still not resolved. So for me, Burma, China, Gaza, these are further areas which I wanted to touch and talk about the issues too. So my main form is inspired by the rear view mirror in car. And this is one of the close-ups. And I did paintings based on photographs taken during either the attacks or when people are moving or being displaced. So this is the first one, which is actually inspired by two photographs of villages in Burma, which were burned and people were pushed to move. So this is one of, this is the one inspired by two photographs. And this is actually gouache. The rear view mirror is carved out of pine wood and stained with black stain. And this is another one. A lot of young kids were killed actually during that time in Burma. Young infants were taken from their mothers, they were killed, and women were often raped. So this was one of the strongest images that spoke to me. This is another one of people just running away. And here you can also see this boy is only holding a plastic bag. So actually my tied up plastic bag came from this painting. It was the idea when I was painting this came to my mind, and I wanted to do in 3D as well. Yeah. This one is, the reference from this one is from a photograph of Gaza during an attack. So I feel Burma and Gaza are places which are still unresolved. So I wanted to bring that up. This is another one. My reference for the portrait of mother and daughter are actually one of the strongest images I've seen. And I felt through their portraits the misery, the pain that they are going through. And often a lot of people were burnt in Burma too, so which I wanted to bring into the installation as well. This has been enhanced. I should mention it is my interpretation of the situation. The portraits are a reference from a photographs though. Okay, so this is another installation, new installation in the show. So when the show was actually up first time at Bellevue Arts Museum in 2017 and 2018, one of the channels wanted to do a documentary on the show and my work. And they asked me if I can go through my old photographs because they wanted to use some of the old photographs for the documentary. And while going through my childhood photographs, in between two photographs, I found two letters written to me by my brother who passed away when I was very young. And my father took him to England for some medical treatment. That's when he passed away in England. And before passing away, he wrote these two letters to me. And I didn't even know I had those letters. So that was a very emotional experience for me. And I ended up carving an envelope out of pine wood and paired with his letter. When I posted the image on social media, a lot of people started sharing their letters with me. Some of my friends, some of the people I had met started sharing that my work made me go through their piles of old letters that they didn't remember at that time, take them out, and they became very emotional. So I felt there was a need for that, and I decided to do a whole series on. I collected letters from different people, written in different languages. The old one being as old as 1905, over 100 years old, and the new one is as new as like written just a few months back. Uh, a girl who found her father in a different country, who was adopted and was living in US through social media. So he wrote a letter to her after they found each other, and she wrote back to him, which were one of the very emotional letters that I've seen. So this is the series. This is how it is installed now at Center for Art in Wood. The envelopes are carved in pine wood, and they are paired with actual letters, and the type versions for the audience to read on the wall. So this is what I feel. I feel it is important that we share our experiences with other people. I feel if we share our story, we can heal other people, and it can heal ourselves too, and also give other people to acknowledge their stories. I have done that through my work. Often when I talk about the experience that I have gone through, or talk about people I've seen go through around me, and I share them, it opened people up, and they start sharing their stories, and which is very important. I feel we haven't resolved a lot of issues, and not talking about has not helped us. So we need to talk about these issues, uh, to open them up, to normalize them, and maybe it's a step towards resolution and change. Thank you. And I'm happy to answer any questions you might have.
Thank you so much, Humaira. Yes, thank you. Round of applause. If anyone has a question, be happy to take it. And I've asked that you type your question in the chat area, and then I'll be happy to read it. That way we kind of minimize on the amount of noise. Um, and bring some organization to these proceedings. So go for it. And thank you so much, Humaira.
Yeah, welcome. Sorry, few times there was some interaction. I hope it's it didn't bother anyone.
Some unexpected guests on their way. Yes, the answer, the question about recording, this will be made online through the center, and also I believe the University of the Arts. So at least 2 platforms will make this lecture available to the public for viewing on your own time. And Fiona has a question about the book about Kenya that you mentioned.
Yeah, it's a camel for a son. It's mainly stories of women who ran from different countries and came cross border Kenya, neighboring countries, and then they were molested in their home countries, and then they were molested again at the border. Some of them molested again in the camps. So they are heartbreaking stories, but it is important that we read these stories and learn about the situations. Not a lot of people or articles are talking about actually these issues. When I was doing my research, I did not find much. I couldn't find information what's happening, especially related to women and girls. And I had to actually go and start talking to different women and to learn their side of stories, or ask people who could go and ask on my behalf in different countries. So yeah, I think there are many issues which we need to discuss and open up.
Thank you. We have a question from Vivian Chu. She is wondering, since your work is so rooted in storytelling, some of which are very specific, and I would add also very personal, when do you choose how much context to give the viewer, and how then do you decide to do it?
There are a few things I follow. I sometimes have a sudden reaction to something which is happening or has happened to me or someone who shared their story. I try to spend some time with it. I sleep on it. I read about it. I do more research on it. I start sketching, and then sometimes it takes time. Sometimes I keep thinking about it for a long time, until I decide to actually represent in a certain way. Sometimes when I'm in the process of creating, I change the way I want to eventually represent. So it's a process. Every time, every story is new, and has a different, it is important for me. I've made a commitment to myself that my new work should be better than my previous work. So I'm not just telling stories, I'm also pushing my boundaries as well of mediums, of concepts. So there are many things I'm constantly thinking about. For me, execution and concept both are equally important.
Thank you for that. We have a question from Chuck Engstrom, who has a technical question. He would like to know how long it takes you to carve some of your pieces. And I know you mentioned during your talk, but actually I'm not sure that people understand the level of intricacy that's involved in your painted works versus your carved works. So when you, as you answer Chuck's question, maybe you could also mention that as well.
So I'll give you some background. When I started working in wood, which is mainly to bring a woman's point of view in a otherwise male dominated medium. In the beginning, my main focus was to learn all the basic techniques. I totally believe if I want to represent my ideas in a medium, first I need to learn all that is possible and I can do. So I have my basics at that time. When I was in art school, I didn't mention earlier, they weren't, my teachers couldn't really help me. So when I said, this is the medium I want to pursue, they said, we don't know how to help you. You can go and find your own way. And I went and sat with traditional carvers for about a year and learned the basics from them. That's why I often work in a way that the traditional carvers work. But along with that, after a few years, in the beginning, for me, it was important that I was carving out of single block of wood. That was my challenge at that time. It's not a challenge for me anymore, because after I finish one challenge and I have to move on to another one. So I keep on pushing my boundaries. So in the beginning, I was creating more works, spending comparatively less time on each and moving from technique to technique, shape and size, trying to master all the different ways of working in a medium. But now I spend a lot more time in each installation. My scale has increased too. And I work a lot more on the details. I'm combining sculpture and miniature painting. So often it's a challenge for me. How am I going to do it? I spend a lot of time figuring out what will be a more successful way of combining two. Some of my pieces like barbed wire fence has taken as long as 3 years. But 3 years does not mean that I was only working on that piece. I was experimenting, I was trying different things, but I was working on other pieces too. So it is often my case. It's hard for me to give you time because most of the time I'm working on multiple pieces. When they are at certain stage, then I keep focus on each one by one and I finish them. Sometimes I can give you an idea, smaller pieces as quick as like few weeks to few months. But then I have also done installation which have taken few years too. I hope I was able to give you some idea. It's hard for me. Even for my miniature painting, sometimes I'm able to finish them in a couple of weeks, the smaller ones, but sometimes scale does not matter. Like the ones I showed you with rear view mirrors, I have spent many weeks on each one of them because of the amount of detail. So scale sometimes cannot define the amount of time. So it's hard for me to give you an idea, but few weeks to few months approximately.
We have a question from Daniel Clayman about your borders to boundaries, and that it's reminiscent of George Segal's sculpture of Holocaust camp prisoners, which is actually depicted in plaster medium. And are you
I'm
familiar
not aware
with
of that one.
Okay, so the question is if this is a purposeful reference or not. And I think maybe this is a good time to kind of go a little bit deeper about your own experience with barbed wire as a small child in Pakistan.
Yeah, so I grew up surrounded by barbed wire fences, and I was the youngest one in my family. So, my brothers would go around it. They would, sometimes flying a kite would cross the barbed wire fence and go on the other side. And being, young child, I would just go wherever they were going. So many times I have tried to pass through the barbed wire fence and hurt myself too. So this is one of the strongest images I have from my childhood, like when there is a boundary defined. And even if you see images of refugees trying to cross borders and moving from one country or place to another, this is often what they are faced with. So this was one of the important installations for me, and actually the first one when I started working on this series. The rest of the show is actually planned around it. And about other artists, actually, once I started working on this installation is when I started exploring or hearing about other artists who have used barbed wire in some capacity in their work.
Thank you. There's a question from Tib Shah. Hi, Tib. And she's asking, she's referring to the work about Peshawar, the Peshawar massacre and the Stains Are Forever. And she's asking if you see yourself working with the violence in American culture, if you see yourself in the future working with this.
I'm open to actually all the situations. When I was living in Pakistan, there are so many issues that I was mainly focused on those, since nobody was talking about them. And I was so stubborn, you can say, that I said, okay, why you can't talk about it? I will talk about it. And I would take it as a challenge. And there are still so many issues that I'm still talking about from Pakistani culture or South Asian societies and some other cultures too. So Asia has been my main focus. But now my recent work, I have been talking about women issues in Arab countries. And then I have been talking about issues of women even in other countries like US. And when I started showing my pieces here, a lot of women would come and share their stories while living in US too. So I feel even when I have been traveling Asia, Africa, no matter Europe, US, I felt all the women issues are same. It's just the difference of scale. So probably here the scale is much smaller, but the issues are similar. I mean, you can see the difference, the same issue of doing similar jobs and not getting enough paid, equal pay, is same here. When I showed my installations about menstrual cycle and the stains left behind and women shamed over it, many women came to me here when it was displayed here, that they started sharing their experience when they were kids, that they didn't know about it until they actually got their first menstrual cycle. So it's happening here too, maybe on a smaller scale, but there are similar issues. So yes, I'm not just focused on one culture or one issue anymore. I'm mainly interested in issues which are universal, and a lot of women can relate to them, no matter what difference of scale, maybe smaller scale or bigger scale, but they can relate to them.
We have a question from Ron Gaudi. In today's situation, particularly now, I think, the definition of home has changed and fluctuated. Is there any way that you would change or add to the concept of home as expressed in the show now at this point?
When I talk about home, I'm not just talking about a specific definition of home. I'm interested in all the definitions and different ideas people have about home. I've also talked to some people who say, I cannot say, where is my home? For me, home is fluid. I don't feel I belong to just one place because I have lived in so many places. And I've also met people who have maybe lived in fewer places, but they don't feel they belong to anyone. And when I moved from US, from Pakistan to US, after a few years, I started feeling like this was my home too. So even for me, it's hard to define home in 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 a specific way. I think it has different definition or meaning for different people, and that's what I'm interested in. I'm interested in everybody's own interpretation of home.
And I think that was, if I'm allowed to make a comment too, that was a question that informed our first discussions around this exhibition is what does it mean to have to leave your home? And how do you define home when you're in between homes, or you're in motion. And that through that, we developed the discussion through your objects and through your depictions of objects that would tell that story of someone who had to leave their home and everything that they had known, and then was looking for the things like shelter, like security, like family, and love, and all of the things that we think of defining a kind of sense of home. How do they experience that on this journey, and then how do they get to a point where they can rebuild a home at the end of that journey?
Correct. Yes, exactly.
Well, I'll throw in a question too.
Okay.
I think it's remarkable in the way that your wood carvings are always one-to-one scale of objects that are familiar to us, that surround our daily lives, and are objects that we use and interact with and have relationship with, such that we don't even think about the terms of that relationship, because those objects are so much a part of our most boring and banal parts of our lives. And yet in your paintings, you do depict, there are humans in those paintings. And I wonder if you could kind of talk about how you jump between mediums and jump between depictions and relationships in the way they're expressed in your work.
So in the beginning of my career, I was trying to explore all scales. I did expand very tiny things into a large scale over life size, and did the other way too. Large scale into smaller, less than life size, and smaller, half life size, and even smaller than that. I think one to one, or the life scale, was the scale that spoke to me. And especially when I started thinking about two mediums that I was most passionate about, miniature painting and sculpture, and how can I combine them, that was the scale that I felt was most appropriate. As you know, I started with Istri series, which is my first series in which I combined sculpture and miniature painting. And Istri is a word that in Pakistan we use for smoothing iron, and when I went to India, it was used for women and wives. And I'm also interested in duality of meaning. So I carved smoothing irons and made miniature paintings based on women issues and placed on the flat side. So the scale at that time, the ratio is important for me. Even when I'm working on installations, that's the most crucial stage for me, that I'm deciding what scale am I going to do it. And if it's not an actual object, when I have an object, usually that's my reference for size and scale. But if I don't have it, it's just a concept or not related to an actual object. This is one of the important things I have to decide, especially for miniature painting, because in miniature painting, it's not one-on-one scale. It's the scale that I'm deciding at that time. So it's I am an artist who speak from heart. For me, feeling is most important. I try different things, and I let myself say, oh, this is the size and scale or the composition that is speaking to me, and that becomes my deciding factor eventually.
Could you talk a little bit about the discussions that have emerged from your experience of being in the exhibition Searching for Hum, and entering into discussions with visitors?
Yeah, it's one of very emotional experiences for me. The first time it happened was from my Red series, which was about motherhood and fertility issues and miscarriages. And I remember when I was going through it, I would try to ask some of my friends who I knew have had miscarriages, and they wouldn't talk to me about it. They were still closed about it. And often they said they feel it becomes a fault of a woman if they share this, so they stop sharing about it, that they are going to get the blame, and they try to keep the story or their experience closed. But when they came to my show, they started crying. Some of them just started crying. They opened up, they started sharing their stories, which was so difficult for me when I was asking them and I was going through them. So I felt that was the first time I felt art has that power to open people up, touch them in a way that otherwise we cannot touch. And from this show too, a lot of people started coming to me, started opening up, started sharing their stories, the letters they have received from their family members, some of them who committed suicide, some of them got killed, some of them while they were migrating. Then there were people who came, started sharing, okay, I have never looked at refugees from this point of view. I never realized what were their circumstances and why they were moving. This has made me think I'm never going to look at them the same way. And then the stories that came out of it, and some people, I didn't even know they had a background or a story of migrating from one place to another. So it has been an emotional experience for me. Every time there is an event, when the show is up, many stories come out, and suddenly it make people come to me and start sharing their story. So I think this is something that I'm passionate about. This is something I want to do through my work and through my life.
Well, thank you for doing that. And if there are no additional questions, um, we will close here. And I'll just say thank you. There's another one. Just under the wire. For an artist that keeps pushing your work conceptually and technically, can you share what you're working on currently? Aha. Okay.
So there is a show, a new series in progress. It's called Sacred Games. So social issues as well as religious issues are two of my main focal points, because societies are influenced by it, affected by it. So this show is focused on social and religious issues. The title is Sacred Games. A lot of times religion is misused by some people, and they twist things um, and affect or influence, try to influence the society the way they want it to be. And this is something that disturbs me. And I've seen that so much, not just when I was growing up, but still now. And not just in one country, in one culture, everywhere. In almost every religion, there are extremists, there are people who are misusing religion for their own benefit or to influence people with their own point of view. So this is my focal point right now for my new series. A lot of my new work is a combination of sculpture and miniature. I'm pushing the boundaries even more. A lot of people started asking me after doing barbed wire fence, how can you beat yourself now, like by doing something better than that? But I think there is no limit, and there is so much more that can be done. I feel my miniature painting training has helped me in my sculpture, and vice versa. My sculpture training, working with traditional mediums and the traditional way has helped me to do miniature painting in a different way too. So I try to look at different ways of doing things that nobody has done before and push the boundaries. And one thing I want to add, sorry, I didn't add in the beginning, that when I went to art school, I said my family was against me. And after a few years, actually, I was able to establish myself. And I was called back as a faculty member right away. I got honors when I graduated with honors. And just within few years, I was able to establish myself as an artist. So my actually family came around. My father said in front of the whole family that he is very proud of me. And it was the right decision. And my brother, who was my biggest opponent, his son is actually in art school. So things changed pretty quickly. Um, so I forgot to share that earlier, but I have a very supporting family. And all I'm able to do is because I have a great support system. I have friends, I have family members who help me in any way they can, and make things work for me, working between two countries.
So I have to, there's a question that just rolled in and I have to ask it because I am representing the Center for Art and Wood, and this is a question that's very near to everything that we do here at the center. So thank you, Reinhold, for asking it. Why do you choose wood for your work? He mentions that he loves wood as a living material, but it might be, and you can correct us, it might be easier to make your objects in a material like ceramic or some other kind of material. So do you have a deeper, are you reaching for narratives in wood that you couldn't get from other materials?
So initially, I took sculpture as a challenge because everybody was warning me, especially as a woman, that it's physically tough. In Pakistan, it was an additional challenge because anything three-dimensional, a lot of people confuse it with religion. Islam came as a reaction to idol worshipping. So anything three-dimensional is considered like an idol. So they were additional challenges for me. And I took it as a challenge. When I was in sculpture department, I felt nobody was working in wood. And we have a rich tradition of wood, mainly for furniture making though. But there was a lot of presence. And then when I started traveling, I felt wood was one medium which was clearly male dominated. And I was interested in women issues. So I said, what better medium than a male dominated medium to talk about women issues? But later on, when I started working in this medium, it spoke to me on a level that no other medium really spoke to me. I tried stone also, but stone didn't speak to me as wood did. I think presence of grains, different colors of wood, being a living material, it all adds into my concepts and the forms. I'm inspired by everyday objects. I use them to tell stories because I think they are like people. They tell stories. And so having a presence of grains and actual color of wood kind of adds that living like quality into which otherwise are objects. So all of that, and I continue to be passionate about it. It just speaks to me. Um, and by combining these mediums, I think by these two mediums, which otherwise look so different from each other, like 2D, 3D, small scale, large scale, even the difference of perspective, how they are looked upon, is so completely different. But when they are combined successfully, uh, they can bring another dimension into the medium. So many reasons.
Thank you so much, Humaira. And thank you everyone for joining us. This is the first Zoom artist talk that the Center for Art and Wood and the University of Arts have hosted, either independently or together. So we were just thrilled to be able to do it with you, Humaira, of all people, and also with all of you who joined us today. So thank you so much for your excellent questions and your participation and your patience as we survived our first Zoom bombers. And please join us in the woodshed where we will post this conversation and many, many others. And don't hesitate to contact me if you have any questions further on. And please, if you're in Philadelphia after we are free to travel and it's safe to do that, please come and visit the Center for Art and Wood and Searching for Home. I should mention that Searching for Home is slated to travel in the next coming years. And if you'd like more information about that, please contact me. I'll write my email address, my direct email address in the chat area. And I would be very, very happy to talk more about that. Also, one more thing, I would be amiss if I did not mention wow, this background is doing weird things to the book, but there is, I guess it's because it's green. There is a book about Humaira's work that was produced in 2018, and a great deal of this book is devoted to Searching for Home. So it's a beautiful book. I am very proud of it. And this is available through the Center for Art and Wood store, which is online, and we are fulfilling orders. So please take a visit to the store as well. Again, once again, thank you so much. Thank you, Humaira, and thank you, Don, and thank you, University Arts, and thank you everyone for joining us.
Yeah, thank you, Humaira. I'm sure we will post the video on our social media and website at UArts if anyone's curious about that. And I hope we can meet if you're in Philadelphia to take down the show at some point.
I would love that.
I hope we can meet face to face then. I'll look forward to that.
Yeah, me too. Thank you.
Thank you everyone for attending. This was really a great collaboration of our two institutions. So, thank you. Yeah.
Bye, everyone. Be well, be safe, be healthy.
Everybody's waving, so goodbye.
Goodbye.